Right, again, shorter topic of class and youth culture. There's lots that we've looked at that relate to class that not necessarily jump straight out at you. So this is one of those where it will take a lot of application of your knowledge, and there's a wide variety of different things that we've looked at which would work for a question on class. Obviously, for a 15-mark question on class or a shorter mark question on class, you might get it asking to explain the relationship between class and membership of youth culture. You have to give different explanations. Then for a 35 marker, you'd have to look at the different explanations and compare it to other perspectives and other views that might say, well, no, it's not class is the most important. It could be ethnicity, or it could be gender, or class might be irrelevant. We have covered a lot of this. It's just applying to the question. So I won't go into a lot of detail about this, but I'll tell you where to look if you need the detail. The first thing I would say is the CCCS and the idea of resistance. Now, the CCCS are Marxists, so this idea is going to be resistance to capitalism, and it's going to be coming from a working class perspective. And you're thinking about your writers like Brake, Hall and Jefferson, Clark and Corrigan, studying groups like the punks and the skinheads, working class groups that exist in order to resist against the capitalist system. Entirely working class and entirely class-based subcultures here. So they're very, very important, and they're going to be very, very useful in a question on class, because essentially it's capitalism and resistance that's going to be causing these groups to form, and they've all got the same social class background. On top of that, because these groups are going to be looking, mainly the CCCS, at working class subcultures, there are some middle class ones that we've looked at, such as the hippies and such as goths. Now, these are going to be far less aggressive subcultures. You know that the spectacular subcultures of the punks and the skinheads were going to be confrontational and volatile and aggressive, and that's the background of these particular groups. Whereas these counterculture movements like the hippies and the goths are middle class usually in origin, and their behaviour is not confrontational or aggressive. We know, for example, from the study, Mike Brake does study the hippies, a middle class group with lots of contradictions, where they are very peace loving. They exist in America after the Vietnam War as a kind of response to that, and they're very anti production lines. They're very anti science and plastics and all of those things. They don't want food genetically modified. They're usually vegan or vegetarian. However, some of the things that they do LSD, speakers to play the music that they're into, their rock and roll, they're okay with those. So there is a lot of elements of contradiction here between the hippies that we look at. And Hodkinson's studies of the goths, I think, is a brilliant one. The goths exist as a kind of a way to represent and maybe share their angst and their dissatisfaction with the way that the world is. They're an artsy, non-aggressive group, but they're a subculture with a lot of longevity. Hodkinson famously says, when you goth for life. And therefore, perhaps what we are seeing here is we're seeing a group that are not short-lived, like some of the Marxist groups are, like the punks or the skinheads or the mods and rockers and the teddy boys. They are groups that exist for entirety of your life. You are a member of this subculture. So goths, I think, are a very good one. We obviously have got the traditional, more working class groups like the punks. Firth looks at them, and they're a response to the social environment of the 1970s. Low wages, unemployment, urban decay. This ties back in with our Marxists. But on top of that, we've got a kind of functionist element that we could also throw in here looking at class. Now, we've got Walter Miller and you've got Albert Cohen. Now, Walter Miller is a functionist, but he's a very, very loose functionist. So we can just talk about him independently. Walter Miller would say focal concerns are the reason that we see young groups of working class lads getting into trouble, and that essentially these working class lads have got a different set of norms and values to the rest of society. So they're not getting into trouble because they're resisting capitalism. They're getting into trouble because they've got a different set of ideas about what the norms and values should be. There's a different kind of consensus there. And Miller's focal concerns are 6 of them in total: trouble, toughness, fate, autonomy, smartness, and excitement. Basically, these ideas are that on a night out, like they might not pay for any drinks, and they might, get into the club without an ID, and they might not pay for a taxi, and these are like smartness and excitement. They might take drugs and alcohol, but if somebody pushes them around, they've got to be tough and macho, and they're going to get into trouble and end up in fistfights. So these are the focal concerns, according to Miller, of the working class lads. It means that they end up getting in trouble. So these little groups, these little youth cultures of working class lads are shaped by their class and are shaped by those norms and values. So in that sense, Walter Miller works well